Ever wonder how the stuff your kids learn in school actually gets decided? You know what I mean? Like, how do they figure out what goes in those textbooks and all those lesson plans?
Yeah, it's a pretty wild process when you think about it.
Well, get ready to dive deep because today we're tackling curriculum planning.
Oh, yeah. Big topic.
And we've got this fascinating chapter from an education textbook that breaks it all down.
That's a good one.
So we'll be trying to make sense of how all these different people and groups and even like global trends come together to shape what ends up on your kids' desks.
Lots of moving pieces for sure.
I mean, I can picture teachers making decisions about their own classrooms, like what to teach each day.
Oh, absolutely. That's where it all starts.
But then what? I mean, how does it go from there to like the whole school district or even the state level?
Well, the textbook actually lays out 5 distinct levels of planning.
5. Okay, let's start with that classroom level then.
Right. So that's what they call the classroom level. Pretty straightforward. And it really emphasizes how much power teachers have. Well, the power to adapt and adjust their lessons to fit the needs of their students.
Makes sense.
I mean, think about it. No 2 classrooms are exactly the same.
Right.
You've got different kids, different learning styles, different challenges.
So the teacher kind of has to be able to roll with the punches.
Exactly. They've got that core curriculum to work with, but they also need that freedom to adjust things on the fly to make sure every student's getting what they need.
Okay, so that's the ground level.
Right, the foundation.
But what happens when we move up a notch?
Well, then you start getting into teams of teachers working together.
Like all the third grade teachers or something.
Exactly. Or maybe it's the English department at a high school.
So it's less about individual students and more about making sure the subject matter lines up across different classrooms.
You got it. They might be coordinating on big projects or figuring out how to sequence topics across a whole school year.
So you've got individual teachers doing their thing and then these teams making sure everything fits together.
That's a great way to put it, like a puzzle, almost.
And I bet things get even more complex when you bring in those higher levels like the school district or the state.
Oh, yeah, that's where those bigger decisions come in.
And that's where we'll pick up next time.
Can't wait to dive into those.
Buckle up, folks, because it's about to get really interesting.
Definitely.
See you next time.
Bye.
Okay, so last time we were talking about how teachers make those day-to-day decisions about what to teach.
Right, that classroom level.
And then those teams of teachers working together to kind of keep things consistent.
Exactly.
But now I'm curious what happens when we zoom out even further to the district level.
Yeah, things definitely start to feel different at that level.
More bureaucratic.
Well, maybe a little.
I mean, it's a much bigger scale, right?
For sure. Instead of one school, you've got a central office overseeing maybe dozens of schools.
Each with their own communities and their own unique challenges.
Absolutely.
So I guess at the district level, they're thinking more about policies that work across the whole district.
Exactly. Things like budgeting, transportation, special education services.
Curriculum, of course.
Right. They might be adopting new district-wide programs or analyzing student achievement data to figure out where schools need extra support.
It's a lot to juggle.
It really is. And they're always thinking about how to allocate resources effectively.
Especially with all those state and federal funding applications.
Oh, yeah, those are huge. Securing funding is a constant concern for districts, and it often influences the programs they can offer.
Makes sense.
Which brings us to that final level in the textbook's framework, the state level.
Okay, so now we're talking about the folks who set those statewide learning standards.
Exactly.
The ones that determine what students should know at each grade level.
Right. They're the ones who approve textbooks, decide what courses are required for graduation.
And even control the flow of funding to those districts we were just talking about.
It all ties together.
It's kind of wild to realize how much influence the state has on what's happening in my kid's classroom.
It is a pretty amazing system when you think about it.
It's like this chain of command, starting from those big policy decisions and trickling down to the everyday learning experiences.
And it's not always a smooth process either.
What do you mean?
Well, sometimes those state-level decisions create challenges at the local level.
Like unintended consequences.
Exactly. Let's say a state mandates a new science curriculum,
Okay.
but they don't provide enough funding for teacher training or new materials.
Oh, I see what you mean.
That could put a real strain on schools and districts.
So it's not enough to just set those standards from above.
Right. It takes collaboration.
Everyone needs to be on the same page.
Exactly.
But didn't the textbook mention something else? Something about these things called sectors?
You have a great memory.
Well, they sounded pretty important.
They are.
I remember they operate alongside those 5 levels we just discussed.
Yeah, but they don't have direct authority.
It's like they're these outside forces influencing the system.
A perfect way to put it. They're stakeholders with a vested interest in shaping education, but they don't necessarily hold official positions within the school system.
So how does this sector actually impact what's happening in a classroom? Give me an example.
Okay, let's take the regional sector.
Regional. Okay.
Think about accreditation.
Like when schools get evaluated to make sure they're meeting certain standards,
You got it.
like a quality control check.
Exactly. Those regional accrediting agencies are part of this sector.
Okay.
They don't dictate the curriculum, but their evaluations and recommendations can really impact what schools prioritize.
Interesting. So even though they're not directly involved in the day-to-day teaching, they can still exert pressure and influence decisions about what gets taught.
Precisely. And this influence becomes even more pronounced when we look at the national sector.
Okay, now we're talking about the big leagues, like the U.S. Department of Education.
They are definitely major players. They're responsible for things like collecting national education data.
Funding research and distributing those big federal grants. Right. But the national sector isn't just about government agencies, right?
Nope. It also includes those powerful professional organizations like teacher unions and subject-specific associations.
So they have a voice in shaping the curriculum, even though they're not technically part of the formal education hierarchy.
Absolutely. Think about a National Association of Math Teachers.
Okay.
They might release a report advocating for a new approach to teaching algebra.
And that could actually influence what happens in classrooms?
It happens all the time.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about top-down mandates from the state.
Right.
There's this whole ecosystem of organizations and groups, each with their own agenda and perspective.
All pushing and pulling on the curriculum.
And don't forget about those private foundations and businesses that invest in education.
Oh, right. They might fund innovative programs, support research initiatives, or even develop their own educational materials.
Their influence can be subtle, but powerful.
For sure.
Man, this is way more complicated than I ever imagined.
It's a lot to take in, for sure. But here's the thing.
What's
It gets even more global.
Wait, you're telling me that what's happening on the other side of the world could impact what's happening in my local school district?
It's true. Think about those international assessments like PISA.
You mean those rankings we sometimes see in the news where they compare American students' math scores to students in other countries?
Exactly. Those assessments, while sometimes controversial, can have a real impact on curriculum discussions.
How so?
Well, let's say American students score lower in science compared to students in another country.
Okay.
That might lead to calls for curriculum reform.
With policymakers and educators looking to other countries for inspiration.
Exactly. They might start asking, what are they doing differently? How can we learn from their successes?
So even though we might think of education as this local issue, we're actually part of a global conversation about what and how students should be learning.
We are. It's all connected.
It really is. And it's not just about those formal assessments either, right?
Nope. There's also this growing trend of global collaboration in education.
Like teachers in the U.S. connecting with teachers in other countries.
Exactly. Sharing ideas, learning from each other's approaches.
That makes a lot of sense. Why reinvent the wheel when you can learn from educators who are already doing innovative things in their classrooms?
Couldn't agree more. This cross-cultural exchange can lead to new insights, fresh perspectives, and ultimately richer learning experiences for students.
It's incredible to think about how interconnected everything is.
It really is. We started this conversation talking about classrooms and teachers, and now we're zooming out to a global perspective.
Mind-blowing. But what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why should you care about these levels and sectors?
Well, that's a great question and a perfect segue into the next part of our discussion.
That's a great question. I mean, we've talked about all these moving parts, these different levels and sectors, but why should someone who's not a teacher or her principal care about all this?
Because it affects all of us, really.
Even if we don't have kids in school.
Even then, think about it. Curriculum shapes the future, right?
Yeah.
It's about what our kids are learning, the skills they're developing, the values they're absorbing.
It's shaping the next generation of citizens, workers, leaders.
Exactly. So whether you're a parent, a grandparent, or just someone who cares about the future, understanding how this system works matters.
So it's not just about what's happening in my kid's classroom.
Right.
It's about understanding those bigger forces that are shaping education as a whole.
Exactly. And once you understand those forces, you can start to see where you can actually make a difference.
Okay, so it's not just this big, overwhelming system I have no control over.
Not at all.
There are things individuals can do.
Absolutely. Start by thinking about your own community. Are there things you'd like to see changed or improved in your local schools?
Like maybe you want to see more emphasis on STEM education.
Or less emphasis on standardized testing?
Or more support for arts programs.
It could be anything. The point is to identify those areas where you feel passionate and then figure out how you can make your voice heard.
Okay, so let's say I'm passionate about making sure the curriculum reflects the diversity of my community.
Great example. In that case, you might start by connecting with your school board representative or organizing a group of parents who share your concerns.
So I can actually influence decisions at the school level.
You absolutely can. Or maybe you want to tackle something at a larger scale.
Like advocating for more equitable funding for schools across my state.
Exactly. That might involve connecting with state-level policymakers or getting involved with organizations that are pushing for education reform.
So it's really about understanding the system, identifying those key players, and finding the most effective way to make your voice heard.
That's a great way to summarize it. And don't underestimate the power of seemingly small actions.
Like what?
Attending a school board meeting, writing a letter to your elected officials, even just having conversations with your friends and neighbors about the importance of education.
All of those things can make a difference.
They can. Those small actions can ripple outward and contribute to a more informed and engaged community.
And who knows, maybe those ripples will eventually turn into waves of change.
That's the hope, because ultimately, the future of education is in all of our hands.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of curriculum planning.
It's been a real eye-opener, and hopefully it's empowered you to get involved and advocate for the kind of education you believe in.
That's what we were hoping for.
Until next time, keep those curious minds engaged. And remember, we all have a role to play in shaping the future.
We do. See you next time.